It's a real pleasure for me to come and share what's going on at the Kennedy Space Center and share the future of NASA's space program with all of you. I kind of feel like I'm coming home a little bit when I come to Marshall. I spent a lot of time up here. When I was in the astronaut office, I was the astronaut rep for the shuttle main engines and solid rocket motors and used to come up here for the level 3 flight readiness reviews. And I remember when Node 1 Unity on the International Space Station was just an empty aluminum shell here at the Boeing facility at Huntsville as we started construction of the space station. I followed it from that beginning to seeing it activated on orbit, and that was pretty cool. So I love. The only difference is it was a lot nicer coming here when I didn't have to go through Atlanta and Delta, and I could just fly my own T-38 one stop all the way. That's a much better way to go. Well, let's talk a little bit about what's going on at the Kennedy Space Center. You know, we're America's spaceport, and Kennedy is a unique place. We've got a 144,000 acre wildlife refuge, a buffer zone to our launch pads. We got that unique cape that we can launch out over the ocean. We've got the most talented, dedicated workforce anywhere when you look at NASA and you consider Johnson, Marshall, Kennedy, all of us working together to make it happen. But in the end, all that hard work comes together at KSC, and that's where we launched the rocket, and that's pretty darn cool. I was talking, you know, we talk about SLS, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Space Launch System. And somebody asked Patrick Sherman, the director here at Marshall, you know, well, where's this rocket going? You know, because people say, what is it going to be used for? And I'm going to talk about that. And some folks call it the rocket to nowhere. Well, dang, that's a rocket to everywhere. But when they ask Patrick, where's that rocket going? He says, why, it's going to the Kennedy Space Center. And that's exactly right. It's going to come down to KSC, and we're going to launch it. Let's talk a little bit about history. You know, we've come a long way in the last 50 years. That was an historic flight. That was May of 1961. That was Alan Shepard on a Mercury Redstone. And he went up, did a parabolic arc, came back down in the ocean. It wasn't until February of 1962 that John Glenn actually flew a Mercury Atlas into orbit around the Earth. But that was our beginnings at the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. But we had grand visions of where we were going to go. Dr. Von Braun and the rocket team here at Huntsville, they wanted to take us to the moon. And we had a young president that challenged us to get there before the end of the decade. And in 1962, we started construction of the facilities at the Kennedy Space Center that would take us to the moon, Launch Complex 39. And this is the iconic vehicle assembly building under construction. And you can see the Launch Control Center under construction, that adjunct to it in white there on the lower right-hand side. And it has been an amazing facility supporting us for over 50 years. And we did go to the moon with the Apollo program. And that was truly amazing when you consider what we accomplished. How many of you were around when we went to the moon in July of 1969 and remember that? Gee, not even a fourth of the audience. Well, I was a young midshipman at the Naval Academy. And you know, I was 12 years old when Alan Shepard flew that first mission. I remember watching it. You know, we were all gathered around the TV watching that. I remember when we landed on the moon, watching that as a midshipman during the summer of '69 at the Naval Academy. And I'll be honest, I never dreamed I could be an astronaut. My goal was to fly. That's all I ever wanted to do since I was 5 years old. And I'm going to talk to the students over here about goals and what you can accomplish when you put your mind to it. But I remember that, and now, as a midshipman, I went and I actually got to see Apollo 13 launch from KSC. And I was in the vehicle assembly building, and I have black and white photos of Saturn V rockets being stacked up to go to the moon that we toured it before we got to see the actual launch. And that was in April of 1970. And I wish I'd have taken a picture of me in there, because you know, I never dreamed I'd be an astronaut, let alone come back and be the director of the Kennedy Space Center. Now I walk in that building and we're transforming it to the future. The space shuttle followed the Apollo program. Of course, we did Skylab in between, and we did the Apollo-Soyuz test project. And the space shuttle was actually under consideration in 1969. And it was in 1972 when they finally got the go-ahead to proceed with the shuttle program, and it was supposed to fly in 1978. But they had some delays, and it flew its first flight. This is an historic picture also This is April 12th, 1981, 20 years to the day that the first human went into space. Yuri Gagarin, Bob Crippen, and John Young, a couple of naval aviators, test pilots, and of course John walked on the moon, flew in Gemini, piloted the Space Shuttle Columbia on the first flight of a reusable spacecraft. And that was pretty darn amazing. And for 30 years, we flew the Space Shuttle and did amazing things with it. We built the International Space Station. We could not have done that without the Space Shuttle. And when it started out, you can't even see the Unity node hardly in there. But underneath that truss structure, there's a little silver module under there. That's Unity, and behind it is the Russian functional cargo block, Zarya. That was the beginning of the space station on my last flight back in 1998. In October of 2000, the Russians had another module up there, and we had a crew go up. And that first crew went up in October. Bill Shepard was the commander. I flew with him on STS-41, my first flight, Navy SEAL, classmate of mine from the Naval Academy, and a couple of Russian cosmonauts, Yuri Gudzinko and Sergei Krikalev. And I had gotten to fly with Sergei on our assembly flight, and a real team effort. And so since October 2000, we've had a permanent crew up there on the space station, and it has grown significantly. It's the size of a football field. It has the volume of a 747 inside. And there's 6 astronauts up there right now working as a team doing amazing science. The shuttle also gave us the Hubble Space Telescope. Look at all that Hubble has given us. One of my very most favorite pictures, and I should have put more slides in here. I digress, 1 minute. I don't know if Hoot's in the audience, but how many heard Hoot Gibson's talk earlier? All right, so he talked all about the shuttle, so I don't have to talk about it that much. Anyway, Hoot gives awesome talks, but there's one slide from the Hubble that just puts everything into perspective to me. It's called the Hubble Deep Field. And if you go out on a dark night and you look up at the Big Dipper and take your hand with your little finger and stick it up by the Big Dipper where there's no stars and look at your little fingernail, and that's the size of the field that Hubble was looking at. And you can't see anything. It's just black. All you see is space between the Big Dipper. And what Hubble saw was not just stars, but hundreds of galaxies with planets. And you know, that's what's out there. It's truly amazing. Kepler continues to find planets all the time right now. And we're finding planets in what they call the Goldilocks zone, where they're not too big, not too small, not too close to their star, not too far away. They could actually be like planet Earth. You know, so somewhere out there, there are other planets like Earth. When in an infinite universe, odds are they got to be. It's pretty amazing. But the space station, in addition to being an awesome science laboratory, it's our stepping stone to the future. It's an engineering test bed that allows us to learn about the human system in a microgravity environment. It allows us to actually develop the systems that we need to go to Mars, because that's where we're going. That's the whole objective of SLS and the Orion Crew Vehicle, the rocket that's being built here and designed here at the Marshall Space Flight Center, is to take us to Mars. That's our destination on the horizon. Well, down at KSC, we're getting ready for a lot of things, and that's what we want to be and what we are, the world's preeminent launch complex for government and commercial flights, enabling the world to explore. We want it to be both commercial and government, crew and cargo, to and from low Earth orbit beyond. And we're making that happen. And in this picture, you can see SLS on pad B and another commercial pad and other rockets taking off down at the Cape. So how are we getting there? At the end of the shuttle program, we took a look at all the facilities that we had at KSC. And in the past, the Kennedy Space Center was very reliant upon one big government program, Apollo, Shuttle, the space station. And now, you know, we want to branch out. One program can't pay for everything at KSC anymore, just as it can't pay at the other centers. So we have to diversify. And what we are doing is we're taking those assets that we no longer need, and we're using them to help enable commercial space operations. So we defined everything that we needed to support the Space Launch System and our exploration program and get beyond planet Earth, and then everything else, we either dedicated it to NASA use, we have shared use where we can have both commercial and government people using it, and that's how we're designing Pad B. We have non-NASA use, where a commercial company takes it over totally, And then we have other facilities that aren't anything that we'd want to give to commercial companies that it isn't appropriate or they're too old, and we're demolishing them. We're getting them off our books. But even the stuff that we turn over to commercial companies, here are assets that, you know, rather than just let them sit and rust, we might need them again one day. We can allow a commercial company to use it, and they pay the maintenance costs on it and save us money so that we can focus on that exploration mission. We also have at the Kennedy Space Center the Launch Services Program, and they are the folks that procure our expendable vehicles for all of NASA's science missions. And these are just some of the missions that we have coming up in the next 3 years. And you know, the next one coming up is going to be OCO-2. You see it in the middle up there. It's the Orbiting Carbon Observatory. A flight I'm going to talk about coming up here in December is Exploration Flight Test 1 with the Orion vehicle. And then that next one down there, the Soil Moisture Active Passive Satellite. And, you know, we do amazing things from a science point of view at NASA, as well as our human exploration program. And look at the rover on Mars. You know, Curiosity, that was truly amazing. That's a precursor to sending humans, and it's a very integrated program, all our science along with our human exploration. The Commercial Crew Program is also at the Kennedy Space Center, but it's really a joint partnership with the Johnson Space Center in Houston, and there are actually folks at Marshall that are also involved, helping us develop a commercial capability to get our crews to our International Space Station on a U.S. rocket. And it started way back there in 2010, and using Space Act agreements. You can see up in the upper left there were a lot of companies that were initially involved. We've necked down to 3 companies that have paid Space Act agreements trying to develop this capability. There's Sierra Nevada. They have a lifting body called the Dream Chaser that launches on an Atlas V. We have Boeing with the CST-100 spacecraft that also launches on an Atlas V. And then SpaceX with the Dragon Rider spacecraft that's on a Falcon 9 rocket. And right now, down at the Kennedy Space Center, a team is sequestered away, evaluating their proposals to pick that initial capability so that they can demonstrate a test to the International Space Station, and there's an option to buy a couple more flights in there also. But eventually, after this contract is awarded in September, we will get to a point where we award for services to fly crews to the International Space Station in 2017. And I am absolutely convinced that we are going to be successful and have that capability in that time frame. The team is just doing an outstanding job. We just published our master plan for the Kennedy Space Center on how we utilize these facilities for the next 20 years. We have a lot of excess capacity down there. And as I said, we are trying to become this multi-user spaceport of the future with government and commercial operations. So there's in some areas here, and I'm not going to go into all the color codes, but there's some land that we could use to help further enable commercial operations. And that's our goals. Our number one priority is supporting NASA programs. Our number one priority, the reason the Kennedy Space Center exists, the reason we have Launch Complex 39 is to support SLS and get us to Mars, to explore beyond planet Earth. That's what our NASA, our government program, is going to do. But we also want to enable commercial space operations, utilize that excess capacity that we have. And so we have this goal of divesting without diminishing our capability. And we also want to get greener and leaner. One of the things that we're doing is building a new headquarters building. And it's going to allow me, with a new data center that we're building, to tear down 3 other buildings that are full of asbestos and everything else and very energy inefficient. And in the end, I'm going to save $6 million a year in operating costs by building a new, green, efficient headquarters building. There really is an evolving commercial market. And it's not as evolving as fast as maybe some would like, but it is going to happen. And a lot of folks ask me, well, what do you think about these guys flying suborbital flights? You know, they're not really going into space. They're just going into space and coming back down. You know, we did that with Alan Shepard back in 1961. And these rocket planes and Virgin Galactic. And, you know, I look at that. If you look back at aviation, and one of my heroes is a boy growing up. I grew up in Minnesota. And we had a family farm up in northern Minnesota. We used to drive through Little Falls, Minnesota. And that's where Charles Lindbergh grew up. and there's a statue of him there, and I'll never forget that. And I've read his biography, and it's awesome. And if you get a chance, it's really interesting reading. It's very well written, and it really details his solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis. But if you look at what aviation was doing after World War I, and they had all these surplus jennies, and you'd go up for $10 or something at the county fair, and you'd see your farm from 2,000 feet. Well, that generated an interest in the public in aviation, and that's kind of what these suborbital flights are. Yes, they're very expensive, but it's generating that interest in going to space, and I want those guys to be successful. The government stimulated commercial aviation through the airmail postal system, and that helped get civilian aviation going. We are stimulating commercial space through our Space Act agreements, through this agreement that we're going to have when we have a contract for services to the International Space Station for crew. And we've already demonstrated we can do it because we did the same thing and developed a commercial cargo capability to Space Station. And we have two companies now, Orbital and SpaceX, that are flying cargo under a services contract to the International Space Station. So this is going to happen, and we want to make facilities at KSC help enable that. Launch Complex 39A, I had a lot of folks say, why are you going to have somebody else lease that? What if we need it in the future? Currently, at the launch rate that we have, we really looked at this, and at the launch rate that we have for the Space Launch System, we only need one launch pad, and we don't have the money to maintain these two huge, very expensive launch complexes. When you see the pad, it looks like just this mound of cement and dirt, but underneath there are all kinds of systems, and it's going to just sit out there and rust in the salt air. So we went out for proposals. We had companies submit that wanted to use it. We evaluated them, and we ended up signing an agreement with SpaceX to actually modify that pad and use it for their Falcon 9 Heavy, and now they are responsible for all the maintenance and operations on that pad, and they'll keep it operational, and it won't cost the government anything. The shuttle landing facility, we no longer have to land orbiters there. We don't have an identified need for it. Yes, we want to be able to bring T-38s in and out, but they could fly into Patrick or somewhere else, and cargo has to come in, but it could come into the skid strip and make it there. So we looked at, is there space there to make that more commercial also, and how could we go about doing that? And we are working on an agreement with Space Florida to take over the maintenance and operations of the shuttle landing facility, and they're going to try and commercialize it and develop horizontal launch capability out of there, both the suborbital flights, and there are folks that actually want to build a big airplane and carry a rocket underneath it out over the Atlantic and air launch a large rocket, and they would operate out of the shuttle landing facility. So this is another partnership that we're looking at, and then we would still be able to utilize it for cargo and T-38s in and out. So the vehicle assembly building in the high bays, again, there were four big, the Apollo guys, the team that was here at Marshall, they had such a vision for space exploration and where they wanted to go. And they had another rocket being designed even bigger than the Saturn V. But this had four big high bays in it that would build rockets to go exploring. Two were utilized during shuttle. And now we only need one high bay in there, and I'll show you pictures of how we've changed it. So we're looking at, would a commercial company be interested in utilizing High Bay 3 and utilizing the mobile launch platforms that were left over from the shuttle program? So we're going to be going out with an announcement for that in the not too distant future too. But this is where NASA's going. This is our focus, and this is really important. And I think this chart kind of puts it in perspective. We have been in this Earth-reliant zone for a long time, where you can get home from the International Space Station if you've got a problem in a matter of hours. And our goal is over there on the right. We want to get to Mars. That's the goal on the horizon. Well, we got a lot to learn before we can do that. We need to get out in that proving zone in the middle, where we can spend months to almost a year out in space, learning what we need to know to be able to be successful to go to Mars. All right? So we've got a plan to do that. And the funding, the way it is, if you look at NASA's budget, it increases by 1% for the next 5 years. And that's essentially a slight decrease when you consider inflation and everything else. It's essentially a flat budget. So we have to be very frugal and lay out a plan that is going to allow us to eventually get to Mars. And the NRC recently put out a report, and if you read the report, we're essentially doing what that report says to do. Now, the report says we should be funded at a higher level, but given where we are in the budget that we believe we have laid out a plan that allows us to develop the systems that we need so that we can eventually get there. And we've chosen to do this asteroid redirect mission. And if you look at all the capabilities that you need to get to Mars, if we are successful on this asteroid redirect mission, we will have accomplished about 2/3 to 3/4 of those tasks that we need to be proficient at and prove before we can get to Mars. And then we'll add on to that. So we're looking at, should we go capture a small asteroid? Should we go get a rock off a big asteroid? And then bring it back to this distant retrograde orbit around the moon that takes 7 to 9 days to get there from Earth. Not like 2 to 3 days when we went to the moon, but 7 to 9 days, and then another 7 to 9 days to get home and explore this asteroid that we've got back. So we're evaluating that this year. We'll make a decision next year on what our path forward is going to be to do that. But we're looking at doing that on Exploration Mission 3 when we actually have the big rocket. So working in that proving ground is going to be critical. The space station is still going to be critical. And that's why we need that capability to get our crews up there on a U.S. rocket, so we can prove these systems in the environment that they're going to be in when we actually go to use them. So I think this is it's an exciting future. And then we got a lot more to do after that. We got to develop a habitability module. We got to develop a lander, and so on, to eventually get to Mars in the 2030s. And this is the vehicle that we're going to get there on. This is what's being designed right now at the Marshall Space Flight Center. Test articles are being built right now down at the Michoud facility in Louisiana. We're getting ready to do a test, a qual test, on that 5-segment solid rocket motor. This utilizes technology that we already have. It's very efficient and cost-effective, utilizing shuttle main engines. This uses 4 shuttle main engines. We have 18 of them in storage from the shuttle program down at the Stennis Space Center at the Rocketdyne facility down there. The solid rocket motor casings we have left over from the shuttle program. But instead of 4 segments like the shuttle, they're going to be 5 segments, like, to get more thrust. The diameter of the liquid core stage, it locks hydrogen just like the space shuttle was. It's the same diameter as the shuttle external tank. And they're building a new welding facility down at Michoud that's going to be the next step, and they'll have everything that they need to complete building this rocket. It's a friction stir welder. It's absolutely phenomenal. And then up at the top is the Orion spacecraft. And we're going to talk more about that. So in the Apollo era, we transitioned to the shuttle, and now we're taking this historic building and we're transitioning HIGHBAY 3 to support the Space Launch System. But we're doing things a little bit different. In Apollo and Shuttle, the platforms were built specifically for that rocket. The Space Launch System starts out in the 70 to 90 metric ton range, but we want to have 130 metric tons to go to Mars. So we have designed the platforms that we're putting into, and I say platform, you think of something the size of this stage. That's a platform in that bottom picture from the shuttle being taken out to clear the way for the new platforms that are going in. These are the size of small buildings. We've designed the platforms in for the new rocket in HIGHBAY 3 such that they can move 10 feet up and down. And then, as the outer mold line of the vehicle changes, as it gets taller and bigger, there are inserts that can be adjusted to accommodate a different shape inside the HIGHBAY. We're going toward a clean pad concept, and you see the mobile launcher that it's being stacked up on with the launch tower, and I'll talk more about that. Out at the pad, you can see in the Apollo era, they rolled out with the the launch support tower on the mobile launcher like we're going to do. But when they got out there, they found out they really needed more access to the rocket, and they had to build another rollaway system that was out there prior to launch. In the shuttle, we had just the mobile launch platform, and all the structure was out at the pad in the upper right over there. And we had that rotating service structure that rolled around the shuttle and allowed access to the payload bay with payloads and so on. We've gone to what we call a clean pad concept. All the support rolls out with the rocket. And out at pad B, the pad that we're going to use, we have a new lightning protection system. We've refurbished all the propellant distribution systems. We pulled all the copper wire out. It's all fiber optics now for communications and data. We actually, when we pulled all the copper wire out and sold it for scrap, we made $620,000 in scrap that we reinvested back into the project. We're working on the environmental control system down there, and it's going to be ready when the rocket comes. The control room, the Launch Control Center, Firing Room 1, has been totally gutted and redone to support the Space Launch System. And you can see it down there in the center picture. You see the Apollo era, the Shuttle era, and this is what it looks like today. And again, state-of-the-art, and this is going to be our launch pad, our launch control center for the next 30 years. In the operations and checkout high bay. Now, this was a great partnership with the state of Florida. Where processing was done before, it is now a manufacturing facility. And in partnership with Florida, the state of Florida invested $35 million to totally redo it for Lockheed Martin to build the Orion spacecraft in there. During Apollo, you can see the command module and service module being lifted on the crane there. And in the middle picture, that's that high bay today. And it is a state-of-the-art manufacturing facility. The crew module shows up as just an aluminum shell from the Michoud facility in Louisiana. And the spacecraft is built there. And you can see it in various stages in the upper right up there of construction. The spacecraft is essentially done now for the first test flight. And this is Exploration Flight Test 1. I'm going to talk more about that. But it's flying this December. And Tuesday morning, the capsule was mounted and mated with the service module in the high bay at KSC in the ONC high bay. What you see down in the bottom is the launch abort system facility. And this is a big rocket that goes on top of the capsule that pulls it off in the event they need to get away from the rocket in an emergency. So this is Exploration Flight Test 1. This is this December. Now, we don't have the big SLS system done, but we've got to run some tests on that Orion multi-purpose crew vehicle before we can fly it with a crew in it. And one of the most important things we want to check out is the thermal protection system that we have built for it, as well as the parachutes and our recovery procedures, as well as some other systems. So in December, it's going to launch on a Delta IV Heavy rocket from the Cape, and right now we're looking at December 6th. It was scheduled for September, and the vehicle, the crew module, will actually be ready in September, but we gave up our launch date for a higher priority DoD mission, and we took a later one. And so we're on track right now to launch in December, and it's going to take off. The whole mission is only going to last about 4 hours. It's going to go around the Earth, and then it's going to go out to 3,600 miles, and then re-enter at about 85% of lunar re-entry velocity to check out the thermal protection system on the vehicle, and then be recovered off the coast of California. And we can check all our recovery procedures. And, this is going to really be exciting. I can't wait until we have this flight. It's a real program. We have real hardware, and we're testing it and building it right now. So I showed you the high bay and how we're coming along there. The crawler transporter, again, the folks back during the Apollo program in the 60s, what vision they had. We used that all through Apollo. We used it for 30 years on Shuttle, and we're using it again. But we had to make some modifications to it because the Space Launch System is heavier. So we've done the wheel bearings over on all 4 of those tracks, and what a huge project that was to accommodate the higher weights. It's got jacking, elevation, and leveling cylinders. So that launch pad is at an angle. So when the crawler gets there, it can't go up like that or the rocket would fall off. So as it goes up the ramp, it levels itself until it gets on the top of the pad. So we've got new cylinders going in to handle the heavier weight. And it's got new generators in it, new brakes, all kinds of stuff. And we've got 2 of these. We're modifying Crawler Transporter 2 to support SLS. And then remember I said we made Pad B available for other customers with those other launch platforms. We still got Crawler Transporter 1 that could be used if necessary to support commercial ops. And there you see Pad B with the mobile launcher out on it. Now that mobile launcher, if you all remember the Constellation program that got canceled, that mobile launcher was built for the Constellation program. And it wasn't complete when the program was canceled. And it was being built down at Kennedy Space Center, but it was actually less expensive to complete it than it was to cancel the contract. So we allowed them to complete the structural steel. No systems are installed on it, right? So that was a $230 million investment. Well, it was a shame to let it go to waste. So we took a look at, can we modify it? Will it be structurally sound to support not just the Ares 1 single solid rocket motor rocket, but the big heavy lift rocket? And sure enough, it was when we did the analysis. So right now, we're modifying the base of it so it accommodates that 4-engine liquid core and the 2 solid rocket motors, and that it's structurally sound for that. And we're designing the systems right now to go in the tower to support that rocket. In the lower right, you see our test facility, and you see one of these big swing arms, and where it attaches over on the other side, that's actually a dynamic facility, and that thing shakes and moves, and it mimics the rocket exactly so that we can test those umbilicals and those systems that we need to separate from it. So great progress being made down at the Cape to support the Space Launch System, the Orion Multi-Purpose Crew Vehicle, and to transition to support commercial operations also. So I want to come over here and talk, because most of the little guys are over here, although there's some here too. I don't want to, you can ask questions too, and you got to listen to this. So when I was 5 years old, we took a train trip from Minneapolis to see my mom's sister in Baltimore, Maryland. And we went to Washington, D.C. Now remember, I was 5 years old. And I remember certain things from that trip like yesterday. First off, you could walk right into the Capitol. You know, it's not like today with all the security and everything. And I remember walking up the steps into the rotunda of the Capitol. I remember the Lincoln Memorial, seeing that big statue of Lincoln, walking up the steps and seeing that. I remember going to Mount Vernon and seeing George Washington's home. I thought that was really cool. I remember climbing to the top of the Washington Monument and looking out those little windows in the top. And I remember going to the Smithsonian and seeing the Wright Flyer and the Spirit of St. Louis hanging from the ceiling. And I said, I want to be a pilot. And I'm telling you, that's where the bug started. And I read all the books I could as I was growing up about the aces and test pilots of World War II and the test pilots in the 50s and 60s. And I said, man, this is what I want to do. And I went off to the United States Naval Academy, and I was going to be a naval aviator because I wanted to fly off aircraft carriers. And there was a naval air station in Minneapolis, and I used to sit off the end of the runway and watch these A4 Skyhawks go in and out and P-2 Neptunes, and I said, wow, that would really be cool. Well, I got into the Naval Academy, and I graduated with a degree in mathematics, and I chose a commission in the Marine Corps, and I had a contract to be a pilot, and I got down to Pensacola, Florida, and I flunked my eye test. And, oh, man, was I disappointed because I couldn't be a pilot. And what it was is the Vietnam War was at its peak, and they had more pilots than they knew what to do with, and so they're just looking for any technicality they could to cut people out. And I said, well, can I be a naval flight officer? How many have seen the movie Top Gun? All right, the guy in the back seat, Goose, he was a naval flight officer. And they said, yes, you can do that. So I earned my wings as a naval flight officer, and I was an A6 bombardier navigator. And every year when I took my flight physical, I had 20/20 vision. And I said, I want to be a pilot. So I put in my paperwork to be a pilot. And they said, yeah, we're too short of BNs. Go overseas and try again. So I went overseas, put in my paperwork again. And I was going to get turned down because they were still too short of bombardier navigators in the Marine Corps. And I went to see the general. And I said, General, you know, and I explained everything. And I'd done a good job when I was overseas. And he said, Bob, you ever need anything, just come see me. So I did. And I had my orders changed from going to be an instructor for A6 bomber navigators going back to flight training. And I earned my wings as a Navy pilot, a naval aviator, a Marine Corps pilot. And I thought, wow, this is great. And I love flying. And then I said, you know, I'd really like to be a test pilot and use all that math and engineering I had in school along with my flying. So as soon as I had 1,000 hours of pilot time, I applied for Navy test pilot school. And they said, sorry, Bob, we don't need any A6 pilots right now. Oh, dang, you know. But 6 months later, I got picked up for Navy test pilot school. And then, after I graduated from test pilot school and I was a test pilot, NASA was taking applications to be an astronaut. And John Young and Dan Brandenstein and some guys came up to Pax River and they gave talks and they encouraged people to apply. And I said, I could actually do this. I could be an astronaut. And I put in all the paperwork. I didn't apply in 1978 because I hadn't been to test pilot school yet. That's when they took the first group of shuttle astronauts. That's when Hoot got selected. And they took another group in 1980, but I hadn't graduated from test pilot school yet. But in 1984, I had. And I got through all the selection process and the interviews. And, oh, man, I was just waiting for that call that said, come on down. And the call came, and they said, sorry, Bob, you didn't make it. Oh, man, was I crushed. And they said, but we're going to take some more next year. We'd like you to try again. So I went through the whole process again, and I was fortunate enough to get selected in 1985. So I didn't get selected to be a pilot on the first try. I didn't get selected to be a test pilot on the first try. And I didn't get selected to be an astronaut on the first try. But they were all things that I wanted to do, and I didn't give up. I kept trying. And, man, you can do pretty much anything you set your mind to if you keep at it and don't give up. The other thing that I would say is find where your passion is, okay? Don't do it because you think you're going to make a lot of money or because somebody else wants you to do it. Do it because you want to do it. My passion was flying. I love flying. I loved everything about aviation. I loved all the math, the engineering, everything associated with flying airplanes. That was my passion. And so I enjoyed it. And the things that you enjoy, you do well at. So find your passion. And then don't give up. Keep working at it. And it's amazing what you can accomplish. All right, what I'd like to do is take questions from anyone on anything that has to do with where NASA's going, what we're doing, or how we're going to get there, or what's going on at KSC. Who's got a question? Or flying in space, or anything you want. Yes, ma'am.
Is the next thing in December, is that going to be for the public, for like the public come see it?
Can the public come see the launch of the Delta IV with Orion on it? You betcha. I hope that we got like 20,000 people down there watching this because it's going to be really cool. And I can't wait. Yep. Yes, sir.
Well, the like not so distant future of like, I don't know, 2022, do you think like the commercial trips to space would be a lot more developed than they are now?
Okay, in like 2022, will the commercial trips to space be more developed than they are now? Yes, they will. First off, we're going to have that one of those commercial crew vehicles that I was talking about flying in 2017. So they're going to gain more experience. And, you know, just because you don't have a contract to fly to ISS, some of those other companies may continue to look to fly to space on a commercial basis. And there may be other space stations up there. Bob Bigelow is looking at putting his own space station up there to accommodate scientists going up and doing experiments. So who knows what's going to happen by 2022. So that, yes, that could absolutely happen. So we just got to see. And as far as dates for the SLS, I didn't cover that real good. We got EFT1 this December. Then the first flight of the big rocket is in fiscal year 18 right now. It's actually scheduled for December 17. It could slip into 18, but that will be without a crew. But it'll be the capsule on the Space Launch System, a complete functional test of the entire thing. And then the first flight with a crew on board is scheduled for 2021. So that's called Exploration Mission 2. And then the next one after that, Exploration Mission 3, that's the one we're looking to go visit that asteroid with. Yes, sir?
Are there any rocket designs or ideas on stopping the asteroid Apophis?
Stopping an asteroid from hitting us?
Yeah, or the asteroid that's coming towards us called Apophis.
Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't tell you. You know, we've got a lot of folks that are looking. We find more asteroids all the time. The scientists are out there, you know, But right now, we don't have any plans to divert any asteroids. That's something that we need to, planetary defense is something that we need to consider and look at. And we have folks that are considering what are we going to do when we find one coming our way and how are we going to stop it. But what we learned from this asteroid redirect mission, all of that is going to, we're going to learn if, through solar electric propulsion, applying a small force over a constant period of time, can we change an orbit enough? And what can we accomplish? So we're going to learn from doing this.
Mr. Cabana, we have a young lady here ready to ask a question over here on this side.
All right.
What's the exact date when the spaceship will launch? Like the one in December will launch?
Right now it's scheduled for, I think, December 6th, but it's going to be in early December in that time frame.
Okay.
The Atlas V rocket that was scheduled to launch around spring break,
I'm sorry, which one?
the Atlas V rocket that had a technical issue that was classified, did it ever launch?
Yes, it did. And there's another launch of a SpaceX rocket coming up here on Father's Day on a commercial mission.
Is NASA working on more environmentally friendly fuel?
Actually, there is a team. We just finished a landing project with the Morpheus lander at the Kennedy Space Center. This was a project that the Johnson Space Center did, and it was really cool. They took a map, a picture of what a landing site on the pole of the moon looked like. I think it was the south pole of the moon, and they recreated it at the end of the shuttle landing facility. And then, using this lander, they tested landing there. But what they were developing was, it was called autonomous landing hazard avoidance terrain capability, so that it could actually, on its own, without any piloting or any guidance, except what it developed on its own, figure out where to land without landing on a rock, okay, and land in a safe place. And the fuel on that vehicle, they were using methane and liquid oxygen. And LOX methane is very environmentally friendly. It's not like using hypergolic fuels at all, much safer and easier to deal with. So that's a technology that we're looking at.
Okay, we're going to do 2 more questions. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any plans for lunar or Martian colonization or whatever, and going up and building a base there? And when do you think that's going to happen?
Oh, man. That's a ways off. But I'm all for it. I kind of thought that we'd be there by now. But I think it's going to happen. I was talking with Bill Gerstenmaier, and he's in charge of all human exploration for NASA. And we were discussing, what is it that we want to do, all right? And, we talk about being explorers. But we don't really want to be explorers. We want to be pioneers. Explorers leave their home base, they go to an extreme environment, they learn about it, and then they come back home to their home base. But pioneers leave their home base, and they establish a presence. They stay where they went. And that's what we want to do. We want to establish a presence, a human presence in the solar system. That's our goal, to be pioneers.
Okay, and our final question.
Where do you see funding for NASA going once the SLS starts?
Well, right now, funding is flat for the next 5 years. And hopefully, maybe after that, it can ramp up a little bit. We'll have to see. During the Apollo program, NASA had 4.5% of the federal budget. We currently have less than 0.5%, 1/10. So our budget this year is 17.9, close to $18 billion. Think what we could do if we had what Apollo had, 10 times that, $180 billion. But given the deficits that we have and where we are, it's unrealistic to think that. So we have laid out a course with the funding that we have that we think is financially sound and will help us develop the capabilities that we need to eventually establish that presence in the solar system. You guys have been a great audience. I have really enjoyed coming back to Marshall and sharing all of this with you. You can find my email. I answer all my own questions. If you think anything else that you want to hear about, drop me a line, and I'll get you an answer. I'll have somebody get you an answer. But I think that what we are doing is absolutely phenomenal. I think it's exciting. NASA has not shut down. We have a real exploration program. We're enabling commercial space. We're developing the technologies that we need to establish that human presence in the solar system. And we have a truly outstanding future. And I can't wait for that rocket that's being designed by the folks here at Huntsville to get down to the Kennedy Space Center so we can complete testing it and launch it. Thank you.